Hello and welcome to the Memorial Day edition of Unmuted. I'm your host, Courtland Warren. I come to you this morning from the S.E. Williams Stadium in Tulsa, Oklahoma, home of the Booker T. Washington Hornets. Why? Because I just finished a Memorial Day workout. And let me tell you, it was all I could do to just get up off of the field, laying on my back after having finished a workout with Robert Caddy of the Better organization. And I tell you, you as my listeners were the reason that I was able to get up as soon as I did. What an incredible workout. My premise is that before you can have discipline in thought and discipline in mind, it works to have discipline of your physical body. If you cannot tell your physical body what to do, what to eat, what to drink, when to sleep, what exercises or physical exertion is necessary, you will be hard pressed to develop the discipline for entrepreneurship, the discipline in marriage, so forth and so on. It is necessary that we treat our physical bodies well because we need our physical body to carry out instruction in this dimension. And so to care about your physical body is to exemplify one's care for themselves. And so I'm out doing that this morning on Memorial Day, and before the barbecue, the hot dogs, the hamburgers, and whatever the case might be. What an important time to still give yourself some love and some self-care. It is, again, Memorial Day here in the United States, and I recognize that you may be listening from other parts of the world. Memorial Day being a day to, yes, recognize those who have fallen in the act of duty, and it is extended to remembrance of our loved ones. And I was actually on social media recently, and a veteran expressed, I believe his name was Jason Jones. He expressed that Memorial Day is not the time to say thank you to veterans as much as it is a time to say or remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the call of duty. And it got me thinking, it got me thinking about not only the lives that have been lost, but as it relates to being a resilient entrepreneur, what are the sacrifices that you are willing to make? What are the sacrifices that perhaps you've been unwilling to make, but yet have the same goal, dream, or desire? And do we actually prepare ourselves for the expectations that we have of ourselves? I've been known to get a little upset on the golf course. I'm not proud of it, but I do it. And I may have thrown a club before. Okay, don't judge. I may have slammed a club down. And in one of those uncharacteristic outbursts, my playing partner that day, his name is Marvin. Marvin said, "Courtland, I got a question for you." He said, "Have you prepared in the way that you have these expectations?" It was a good point, and the truth was that I had not. And so let's be sure that we are preparing ourselves in the way that fits what our expectations of ourselves is, okay? So in speaking of courage, I want to share some insights with you, just a short podcast today, and let you get about your holiday and enjoying your family time and so forth. But as I began to really look at what courage is and what courage is not, it is very important to understand that courage is not the absence of fear. To say that you are courageous does not mean that you are not, at least to a degree, afraid or perhaps all out fearful. It does suggest, however, that you are willing to move in face of the fear that you are experiencing. Does that make sense? And so fear itself is a very natural human emotion, and it can be triggered by a variety of situations. It could be public speaking. It could be skydiving. It could be a job interview. It could be a first date. There are a number of situations that can trigger the fear response, okay? And while fear can be a useful response in some situations, right? I've often shared with live audiences that I don't speak of fearlessness, okay? Because to truly be fearless could be a dangerous way of living. Why? Because there are times when fear actually saves your life. If I'm walking through a wooded area and there's a cave and I hear a growl or a snarl come from that cave, it might serve me to be afraid, okay, to be fearful, because that fear may lead me to flight, right, to get out of there. And the fear in that case saves my life, okay? So I don't really promote fearlessness. But it's also true that there are times when the fear is not warranted, okay? And in those situations, it can hold us back from achieving our goals and living our best life. And so one way to overcome fear is to reframe it as a challenge, okay? So rather than see it as something that you are afraid of, how about using it as, or to reframe it, to see it differently, to take on a different perspective and see it as a challenge that you are to embrace, okay? So reframing fear as a challenge means essentially that we shift our mindset from one of avoidance to one of action. So from one of perhaps flight, okay, to fight. So rather than avoid it or ignore it, we face up to it and we decide to embrace it and challenge it. And here is then a framework that you can use in order to reframe fear into a challenge. So rather than something that you avoid, it becomes something that you embrace. And as a result of that, you display more courage. You're willing to sacrifice more. You're willing to give up more in order to have the dream, the goal, or the aspiration. And as we recognize Memorial Day, it is essentially it does not mean that there was no fear present, but the desire for a different outcome, the desire to embrace it as challenge, won out. Okay, so we first must acknowledge, okay, in this framework and in shifting our mindset to see fear as a challenge, we first acknowledge that there is fear present in the first place, okay? So the first step in reframing fear as a challenge is to acknowledge that you are feeling afraid. Something very powerful happens when we acknowledge what is versus looking to cover it up, okay? So you don't try to push your fear away or ignore it. Instead, take a moment to recognize and accept that that is what you are feeling. So a feeling is the conscious awareness of a vibration. And so the more aware and present we are, then the more grounded we experience ourselves as being. Okay, so we first acknowledge that we are feeling fear, and then secondly, we identify what the challenge is. So if I'm feeling fear, okay, I'm present enough to recognize that I am feeling fear, then I open open my eyes, so to speak, to recognize that there is a challenge in front of me, one that can be embraced. Like, why else would I be feeling what I'm feeling if there were not an opportunity to be faced, okay? A challenge to be embraced. And so once you've acknowledged the fear, identify the challenge that it represents. What is it that you're afraid of? Is it public speaking? Is it trying a new activity? Or is it taking a risk in your personal or professional life? And so recognizing what the opportunity is, we can begin possibly begin to experience some excitement and enthusiasm as we consider what might be on the other side of whatever it is that we are resisting. And then part 3 of this homework, so we identify the challenge, one, acknowledge the fear, and then 2, identify the challenge. Well, 3, we're going to break it down now, okay? And so once you've identified what the challenge is, break it down into smaller, more manageable steps. Why? Because rather than try to attack it all at one time, now, like, we don't scale a mountain with one leap. We don't scale the mountain with one jump. It's one step at a time, okay? And so when we break it down and we are able to get it to more manageable steps, and this will help you see the challenge as something that can be overcome rather than an insurmountable obstacle. So, it was, as I was sharing with you, I just finished a workout, and we used the football stadium of the Booker T. Washington Hornets in Tulsa, Oklahoma. By the way, one of the more elite programs in all of high school sports. You look at, I know this is a tangent, but I'll be back. If you look at the number of professional athletes, particularly in football, from the Tulsa, Oklahoma, Booker T. Washington Hornets, you might be surprised at the number. But that's it. When I was during the workout, right, there were parts where I could just, I'm taking longer breaths. I'm taking longer time because I'm on one goal line and I'm looking at the fact that we got to get to the other goal line. And man, I tell you, I was even more and more exhausted. However, when I chopped it down into, let me just cover the next 5 yards, and then just let me get to the next 10 yards, and let me get to the next 5, and then that 5 became another 10. Before I knew it, right, I'm at the other goal line or goal post. Get the idea? So we want to break it down to its more smaller steps, okay, and that makes it less of an insurmountable obstacle. And then number 4, to reframe fear into a challenge, and we notice that we have greater courage when we see it as a challenge. It's very important to set goals. What is personal development without at least periodic conversation around goal setting? And so my encouragement to you is that you set specific, achievable goals for yourself that will overcome the challenge. See, the reason why it's not enough to just set a goal, but you want to set it in relation to the challenge that you're looking to overcome, is because this keeps you focused. It keeps you from being distracted and kind of all over the place, right? And so then you can term yourself as busy, all right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting things done. So you want to set goals that are in relation to what you want to accomplish. For example, if you're afraid of speaking in public, your goal might be to give short presentations. You might set a goal to, shameless plug, attend Move the Room. You might set a goal to speak to small groups or to colleagues. You want to get it into smaller chunks, yes, okay, more bite-sized pieces, but you don't do it just to say that you're busy, but rather it's in alignment, right? It's in the direction of what your ultimate goal is. And so once the goal is now set, now we got to go out and take action. So finally, we take action to overcome the challenge. Now, this might seem pretty obvious, but the number of times that people do all of the previous steps. They recognize that they are afraid. They identify what the challenge is, what they are afraid of. They break it down into smaller pieces. They can see it now as something that is surmountable. They then set a specific goal, and they have a plan in place. And guess what? After having done all of that, they don't move. And so I believe it was Einstein who said that nothing happens until something moves. And so ultimately, you got to be willing to take action. Okay. And so remember that taking action is the key to reframing fear as a challenge. And so those previous steps in the framework able you to provide knowledge and understanding of what the challenge is, and your courage will grow the greater understanding you have. Why? Because we fear less the more understanding we have. Does it make sense? Okay. So we're going to, again, those 5 steps in reframing our fear into a challenge. And the science shows that when we see it as challenge, then we're less fearful of it. So 1, we acknowledge what we're feeling. 2, we identify what the challenge is. 3, we break it down into smaller steps. 4, we set goals that are specific to that challenge. And then 5, we take action on those goals. And by reframing the fear as challenge, you can turn a negative emotion into a positive opportunity for growth and for learning. By acknowledging your fear, identifying the challenge, breaking it down into smaller steps, setting goals, and taking action, you can overcome fears that are keeping you from achieving your most worthwhile goals. Okay. I hope that helps. Right. And this is a way for you to, again, to reframe. Now, one of the things that I like to do is you take an entire framework, but then put it in story form. Okay. And so we're going to take everything that we just shared there, and we're going to put it in the form of an allegorical story. And I believe it really drives home the point. Okay, so and I got the assistance of ChatGPT. This is my way of encouraging you to embrace the technologies of AI. And you don't have to make it like you're just coming up with it all yourself, right? You just say, okay, I went to AI to get a little bit of assistance, right? Nothing wrong with using the tools if it's going to help your audience be more effective, okay, and provide more value to them. All right, so before we close out the episode today, here's a story that really surmises what we've talked about in relation to taking our fear and reframing it as a challenge. Once upon a time, there was a young girl named Lily who lived in a small village at the foot of a great mountain. Now, Lily had always been afraid of the mountain, which loomed over the village like a giant, ominous presence. She had heard stories of people who tried to climb the mountain and failed, and she was convinced that it was then impossible to conquer. One day, a wise old woman came to the village and saw the fear in Lily's eyes. "Child," she said, "the mountain is not something to be feared. It is a challenge to overcome." Now, Lily was skeptical, but the old woman explained that by reframing her fear as a challenge, she could turn her weakness into strength. She encouraged Lily to break the challenge down into smaller steps, set goals for herself, and take action to overcome her fear. Now, Lily eventually decided to take the old woman's advice and began to practice climbing smaller hills and mountains around the village. She set a goal for herself to climb to the top of the mountain within a year, and she worked tirelessly to prepare herself for the challenge. As the day of the climb approached, Lily felt a mix of excitement and fear, but she reminded herself that this was a challenge. It was not something to be feared. She took a deep breath and began the climb. The climb was difficult, and at times Lily felt like giving up. But she remembered the old woman's words and focused on the smaller steps right in front of her, one at a time. She reached the halfway point and felt a surge of confidence. She was doing it. As she climbed higher, the view became more and more breathtaking. She could see the entire village below her, and the world seemed to stretch out before her. She felt a sense of triumph and accomplishment that she had never felt before. Finally, after hours of climbing, Lily reached the summit of the mountain. She stood at the top, looking at the world below her, and felt a sense of pride and joy that she had never experienced before. She had conquered her fear and turned it into a challenge, and in doing so, she had discovered her strength and resilience. And from that day forward, Lily was no longer afraid of the mountain. She saw it as a challenge to be overcome, and she knew that she was capable of conquering any challenge that came her way. So here's my question to you. What's the mountain in your life that you've been staring at, that you've been looking upon with fear, with anxiety? You've been listening to others talk about how difficult it was. Perhaps you've seen others attempt and fail. You've seen others attempt to start the business and quit. You've seen others experience heartbreak in relationship. You've seen others look to get their bodies in physical shape and they fall backwards. And so as a result, because you watch what someone else did and did not experience that success, because they didn't, you have determined that perhaps it is insurmountable, and perhaps you've decided that it's not even worth the attempt. What is the mountain in your life that you've been unwilling to scale because you've witnessed the failure of someone else? And what would happen for you if, rather than just being content to be afraid, you acknowledge that yes, there is some fear, but there's got to be a way? And you broke it down. You broke this mountain down into smaller, more surmountable steps. What would happen if you started to train like Lily did? Smaller mountains, smaller inclines. What would happen if in your life you had a coach, someone who's been there before as a guide for others? What would happen? What would happen if you decided to listen to someone who's actually done it? What would happen if you set the goal? Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but you set the goal to replace your own personal income or to replace your current income through your own business in the next 6 months, in the next year. What would happen? What would happen if you looked at that mountain not as something that was insurmountable, but you decided to embrace it? And yes, when the nerves arose and anxiety started to build, you acknowledged it and you decided that one step at a time you'd take it on. Imagine how you start to feel when you see yourself at halfway. When you get to a point like Lily did, when you can look back and see some progress, you can see the village below, you can see where you started, and that not be used as reason to turn around, but it serves as fuel to keep going. What will it feel like for you when you scale that mountain, when you stand triumphantly at the top and you're there remembering how you started? Whose life would you then inspire? Not because you were not afraid, but because you were willing to reframe what you feared and saw it as a challenge that could be overcome. I hope that helps. If it does, don't keep the podcast a secret. Let someone know that it exists. We appreciate that. And if you are looking for a guide, if you want the assistance of someone who has assisted thousands, literally, verifiably thousands of people in transforming their life, you find yourself as a resilient entrepreneur, or you aspire to be, or you have a message that you want to get out to the world and a vision that you believe will serve others, I'm here to assist. You can reach out through the social media channels or by emailing info@courtlandwarren.com. And remember, you're not alone. You never have been. Let's go. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unmuted. We'll see you next time.